Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities.
Fans who thought the palace drama had settled were shocked when reports suddenly revealed that King Charles had handed Prince William full control of royal affairs, just as Camilla's scandal erupted in the headlines. For years, many assumed the king's influence over the monarchy was unshakable and steady, despite whispers of tension behind closed doors. But insiders now claim William may be stepping into a role more powerful than anyone expected. So, what exactly does this shift in authority mean for the royal family? And could it change the balance of power forever? Silent royal transition. In a move that shocked even the most experienced royal observers, King Charles executed a transfer of authority so quiet, so subtle, that it could have been mistaken for an ordinary day in the palace. There were no flashing cameras, no grand announcements, no ceremonial fanfare. Instead, with a few decisive signatures and the turn of a hand, he handed over the reins of power to his son William, sidestepping every tradition, protocol, and notably, Camilla entirely. It wasn't a gentle passing of responsibility. It was a deliberate act of urgency, a symbolic torch hurled blazing into the hands of a prince long prepared, yet not officially ready to command. The mechanism of this sudden transition was almost startling in its simplicity. Hidden within a plain, slightly worn folder marked only with the initials ESD, lay a collection of documents known in the most serious of palace circles as the Emergency Succession Dossier. These were legal instruments Charles had been counseled to prepare for exactly this kind of situation. Though traditionally, they were intended for illness, injury, or wartime upheaval. Yet the crisis that prompted the envelope's opening had nothing to do with health or foreign threat. It was a scandal, betrayal, broken trust, the kind of breach that leaves no room for hesitation or ceremony. Charles's signature, followed swiftly by those of his closest advisors, completed the act. There was no pride in the motion, no triumph. This was not a declaration of victory or strategic maneuver. It was surrender to inevitability, to circumstance, to a reality that could no longer be postponed. William, though still unofficial in title, became the ultimate authority. Every decision, every directive, every delicate maneuver within the royal household now rested in his hands. And the walls of the palace seemed to hum with the knowledge of this new truth. The legal teams worked feverishly, around the clock, to formalize this transfer behind a veil of secrecy. There would be no coronation to announce it, no public declaration of abdication. To preserve the appearance of continuity, the monarchy had to appear unchanged, even as it reinvented itself from within. And yet, subtle shifts began almost immediately. Appearances by the Queen Consort were quietly cancelled. Initiatives once prioritized were shelved or delayed indefinitely. The machinery of influence that had once seemed unshakable was being dismantled piece by piece, quietly, efficiently, and without fanfare. Those close to the process described William's first executive decisions as uncompromising. But this was not vengeance. This was control being reasserted, discipline being restored. Staff were instructed to realign reporting structures. Advisors who once answered only to Charles were now summoned to brief William. Resistance was swiftly neutralized. Those unwilling to comply were replaced. There was no room for hesitation, no time for indecision. The monarchy, the institution that had endured centuries, was evolving before anyone outside could perceive it, and the eraser was already in motion. Camilla's influence, once pervasive and formidable, began to wane almost hourly. Her closest aides were reassigned, her press liaison dismissed, and her initiatives quietly buried. The shadow of her presence within the palace was shrinking, making space for a new vision to take shape. William's vision. Every corridor, every office, every protocol started to bend subtly toward the reality of new leadership. It was a transformation so complete that those who had once considered the palace immutable began to question how much power any single figure truly retained. Then, in a gesture that was as haunting as it was deliberate, Charles vanished from the palace. He did not leave the country, nor the family, but he slipped quietly from the public eye. Late one night, with only a single aide accompanying him, he entered a black vehicle, destination unknown, itinerary undisclosed. For a man who had spent decades waiting to fully assume the throne, the image of him disappearing into the darkness, leaving his son to restructure and command, became a symbol of an institution at a crossroads. Some whispered he would return within days. Others speculated he might never return at all. Outside the gates, speculation ran rampant. Official statements were vague, offering neither confirmation nor denial, leaving the public in suspense while the palace quietly recalibrated itself. Inside, the truth was undeniable. Authority had shifted, and Charles no longer held the final word. The act of transferring power is irreversible, and every advisor, every staff member, every legal expert understood that the next moves would define the monarchy for a generation. While the nation speculated and gasped, one figure quietly rose in influence, her impact invisible to most, yet decisive. Catherine said nothing publicly, no interviews, no smiles for the cameras, no carefully scripted appearances. But behind the closed doors of the palace, her influence was monumental. She operated with precision, composure, and an almost surgical approach to strategy. Every shift William made, every briefing he received, every policy change bore her subtle but unmistakable imprint. She coordinated communications with foreign leaders, ensuring that diplomats understood the new reality of power without ever announcing it. Recognition was not her goal. Clarity and control were. She was shaping the monarchy, guiding William, and solidifying authority in a way that left no margin for error. A defining moment came when an advisor suggested a gesture of reconciliation toward Camilla, a soft return to public life, a symbolic acknowledgement to ease tensions. Catherine listened, paused, and then stated simply, "That won't be necessary." The confidence in her quiet delivery left no room for argument. The advisor, once eager and persuasive, found himself silenced by the sheer force of restraint. Staff later described the moment as chilling in its effectiveness. No raised voice, no dramatics, yet unmistakable power. Hesitation was no longer an option. The era of indecision had ended, and Catherine had drawn the boundary lines for the new order. And at the center of it all, Catherine remained the unseen force, her influence silent yet resounding, ensuring that William's reign would begin not with doubt, but with control, clarity, and purpose. Was this abdication or exile for Camilla? Let's take a closer look. Camilla's royal scandal. At first, it all sounded like ordinary palace gossip. Whispers about something being off with Camilla's latest royal initiatives. But then the rumors began to carry weight. Formerly loyal insiders started dropping subtle hints to reporters. A seasoned footman claimed to have seen confidential files quietly removed late at night. A maid admitted overhearing tense arguments behind locked doors. What began as soft whispers quickly grew into a low, uneasy murmur that spread through the palace staff like a shiver. Then came the first real spark of truth. A respected whistleblower from Clarence House stepped forward, careful, deliberate, speaking only under strict anonymity. They revealed the existence of encrypted messages between Camilla and a figure long erased from palace records, someone whose influence had been meticulously scrubbed years ago. If genuine, these communications didn't just threaten Camilla's image, they could uncover a scandal the monarchy had spent decades trying to bury. The palace felt the tremors immediately. Trust fractured. Secret investigations quietly began. Meanwhile, Camilla's recent policy documents, work she had championed as part of her vision for a modern monarchy, vanished completely. Not misplaced, not misfiled. Gone. No digital trace, no backup. Even a royal archivist was reportedly dismissed without explanation. As the media pieced together timelines, Camilla remained absent. She canceled 2 appearances, skipped an environmental summit she had personally organized, and offered a vague statement citing health concerns. But the gaps only fueled suspicion. Public curiosity erupted into a media storm, and tension inside the royal household reached a fever pitch. The Queen Consort's absence disrupted scheduled engagements. Charles appeared distant, distracted, and fragile. Staff noted him pacing alone through the Highgrove Gardens, phone in hand, a grim, unreadable expression etched on his face. Then, in a move that deepened intrigue, King Charles disappeared from public view entirely for 3 days. No appearances, no statements, no updates. Rumors of illness, abdication, or worse, ran rampant. But the reality behind closed doors was far more explosive. Inside the palace, William was summoned to an emergency meeting. This was not a casual discussion. It was tense, heated, and urgent. Voices reportedly rose. An advisor allegedly left pale and silent. William, usually composed, reportedly slammed his fist on the table. He had reached his limit, not only with Camilla, but with his father's hesitation. He demanded answers. He demanded action. While the world speculated about Camilla's actions, darker truths began to emerge. William was about to inherit a crisis that would change everything. Decades of public scrutiny, internal betrayal, and private heartbreak had not prepared him, or his father, for the scale of the fallout. The monarchy, already balancing precariously between tradition and modern relevance, now faced its most personal and perilous crisis yet. And in the eye of the storm stood King Charles, torn between love, legacy, and his deepest fear, losing control. Behind palace walls, he quietly began to crumble. The man who had waited longer than any other heir in history for his moment on the throne now felt trapped in its golden cage. Control over the narrative became her next battlefield. Every statement, every leak, every photograph was meticulously managed. Her media team operated with near-military precision. Requests from journalists were evaluated and intercepted before reaching the palace. Rumors of Camilla's status suppressed, and the press carefully directed to report only what was sanctioned. Public perception, once a chaotic battlefield of speculation and conjecture, was now guided with deliberate intent. The monarchy's image was being redefined in real time, and Catherine was at the helm, invisible but unmistakably dominant. In the privacy of his study, where portraits of ancestors silently watched over him, he turned to the one outlet untouched by protocol: his journals. Ink flowed across the pages, recording the decay of certainty, a monarch confronting a world that was slipping through his fingers. Had he been wrong about the woman he had once defended so passionately? Could his love for Camilla now be the very force threatening the monarchy he had spent a lifetime protecting? Why did he give full authority to William? Let's take a closer look. William's unexpected rise. Behind the closed doors of the palace, the quiet machinery of monarchy began to stir and shift in ways no one had expected. The senior advisors, who once hung on Charles's every word, started gathering in secret, whispering in small rooms about what might come next. Memos were written without the king knowing. Plans for a sudden transfer of power were debated in hushed voices. Though the palace still looked calm to the public, inside it hummed with nervous tension, as if the air itself had grown heavier. Something fundamental had changed, something that could not be undone. At the very heart of this storm stood a man pulled in opposite directions, loyal to his queen, protective of his son, and devoted to the crown. The pressure built quietly, almost invisibly, until it finally snapped. Charles broke all tradition. He requested a private meeting with Camilla, away from advisors, away from aides, away from any listening ears. For the rest of the evening, no one was allowed near the West Wing. What happened behind those doors was never officially recorded, but those close to the king described the fallout as nothing short of seismic. For the first time in recent memory, Charles refused to appear alongside Camilla at a public engagement. No explanation was offered. Royal photographers were told to crop her out of official portraits. The message was subtle, but impossible to miss. A boundary had been drawn. A line had been crossed. The press, already eager for drama, erupted. Old controversies resurfaced. Investigations into Camilla's past were re-examined. Former friends and acquaintances, long silent, began speaking to journalists. This time, Charles was no longer shielding her. Cornered, exhausted, and increasingly isolated, Charles made the most consequential decision of his reign. He summoned William. No aides, no advisors, no record. Nothing was written down, intentionally breaking centuries of royal tradition. This was no formal ceremony, no casual father-son talk. It was a passing of a burden, a torch exchanged in shadow. What they said in that room remains unknown. But one detail leaked. Charles did not call William "my son." Instead, he addressed him as the one who must lead now. In that private, unrecorded encounter, history quietly shifted. A father yielded to his son, and a kingdom, unaware, stepped into a new chapter. Charles had never asked for this. Not like this. Not now. But William had long carried the weight of two legacies: Diana's fierce defiance and Charles's careful restraint. And now, thrown into the center of an escalating royal scandal, William was no longer the heir waiting in the wings. He had become the man the monarchy needed, whether he was ready or not. When Charles spoke those fateful words, the ones William had feared for days, the shift began. Silent, unseen, yet thunderous in its meaning. William felt the weight settle on his shoulders, not with pride, but with responsibility, a burden he could not set aside. Is there internal conflict in the monarchy, or something more serious? Let's find out. Monarchies struggle for survival. For years, he had watched his father struggle to keep a fragile monarchy from falling apart, and for just as long, he had doubted whether he could ever do better. Now, with the real power of the throne quietly resting in his hands, that doubt had to be buried. Not because he suddenly felt fearless, but because there was no other choice. The scandal wasn't just about Camilla. It struck at the very heart of the monarchy's reputation. The press circled like vultures, relentless and hungry, and William realized this was bigger than his father's missteps. This was about survival, his family's, the institutions, and his own. Amid the chaos, memories of his mother came rushing back, sharper and harsher than ever. Diana had warned him, in whispers, in tears, about the palace's hidden machinery. She had spoken of manipulation dressed up as tradition, of betrayals lurking behind the polite smiles and formal bows. Back then, he had only half understood. Now, watching alliances crumble and walls shift, her words rang painfully true. The palace hadn't changed. It had only learned, adapted, and now it was testing him. And it wasn't testing with warmth. It was calculating, patient, and merciless. He could either steer it forward or be swallowed whole. Catherine became his anchor. In the long private hours after Charles's quiet withdrawal, she stood beside him not just as a wife, but as a strategist. She didn't talk in fancy royal phrases. She spoke plain truths. She reminded him who he was, why he mattered, and what was at stake if he faltered. She reminded him that leadership isn't about crowns or ceremonies. It's about the decisive moments that define everything. This, whether he liked it or not, was his moment. Even inside the palace, the change was clear. Staff who once took their cues from Charles began to look to William. Protocol officers quietly ran statements past him before releasing them. His voice, though not officially recognized, was being heard and obeyed. One senior advisor even said, "The king may wear the crown, but William is already ruling. It wasn't a rebellion, and it wasn't a coup. It was natural, almost inevitable, shaped by crisis and necessity. But there was one conversation that cemented everything. In a quiet, shadowed library, far from staff and press, Princess Anne spoke truths no one else dared voice. "You're not preparing to lead anymore," she said. "You are leading. And if you wait for permission, you've already failed." There were no cheers, no ceremonies, just a heavy, unspoken weight, the moment of accepting destiny. That night, William did something unseen but monumental. He drafted a confidential letter acknowledging the transfer of authority. He didn't sign it in triumph or celebration. He signed it with quiet determination, and he locked it away in a drawer untouched since the day his mother had died. This was a monarchy transformed not with spectacle, but with strategy. Power had shifted, and while Charles receded into the shadows and Camilla's influence dwindled, William and Catherine quietly assumed control. One acted as the visible authority, the other as the strategic architect. Together, they reoriented centuries of tradition to fit the exigencies of a new era. Every decision was measured, every adjustment deliberate. The palace had changed its rhythm, its internal hierarchies, and its very perception of leadership, and it had done so without a single public fanfare. The kingdom, meanwhile, watched, speculated, and waited. Headlines hinted at scandal, whispered rumors of abdication, and the public imagination ran wild. Yet inside those walls, far from the cameras and columns of newsprint, the reality was unambiguous. Authority had passed, trust had been broken and rebuilt, and a new era had quietly begun. What the world saw as chaos was, in truth, a carefully orchestrated transfer of power, a transformation so complete that it would shape the monarchy for decades to come. In that act, he wasn't just taking control, he was stepping into the role he had been born to inherit, whether the world was ready or not. What had Camilla done that turned everything into irreparable chaos? Could she be hiding something from the monarchy? Let's find out. Camilla's secrets that shook the monarchy. What had been meant to remain hidden, letters, bank statements, secret meetings, suddenly threatened to ignite a storm that could shatter public trust in the monarchy. In today's digital world, secrets have a way of escaping even the tightest locks. And when Camilla's alleged dealings were traced back to a shadowy figure long shunned by the palace, the fragile silence that had held for decades shattered like glass. It began innocuously enough. A single encrypted message, unearthed by a whistleblower buried deep inside the royal communications network. At first, it was dismissed as nothing more than a technical glitch, a stray email lost in the spam filter. But closer examination revealed something far more alarming. The message originated from an account registered under an alias thought to be long dormant. Once decrypted, it connected to a contact from Camilla's past, a disgraced foreign diplomat from the early 1990s, quietly exiled after a bitter fallout with the crown. This diplomat had resurfaced in murky financial and geopolitical circles, and the content of the message suggested far-reaching influence, backroom deals, and undisclosed favors. The implications were impossible to ignore. But the story did not end with one message. A deeper dive into royal finances exposed a trail of suspicious transactions. Donations labeled under vague philanthropic projects, when traced, led directly to shell companies linked to the same exiled diplomat. What initially seemed like careless bookkeeping now revealed a web of complicity, dragging Camilla's name into schemes that went far beyond ceremonial tradition. These were not harmless gestures or charitable endorsements, they were maneuvers with real political weight. If revealed, they would not merely embarrass the monarchy, they would rip apart its moral authority. Catherine, fully immersed in damage control, confronted Charles with rare urgency. Sources say she didn't soften her words. If this leaks, she warned, it's not just her reputation on the line. It's yours, mine. the children. Her voice carried the weight of a prophecy, not a threat. Catherine was never impulsive. For her to speak like this meant the danger was closer than anyone dared admit. Charles, already reeling from passing day-to-day control to William, was paralyzed. Not in denial, but in devastation. The woman he had defied centuries of tradition to marry had now become the greatest threat to everything he had spent a lifetime preparing to inherit. As media scrutiny intensified, Camilla's past erupted into the spotlight. Tabloids, ex-colleagues, and online investigators unearthed her connections to foreign advisors who had subtly influenced royal stances on global humanitarian initiatives. While no laws were technically broken, the ethical fallout was severe. The palace could not ignore it. Yet rather than a full investigation, they announced a limited inquiry, a phrase designed to signal action without real consequence, only fueling the press's hunger for more. Then came the moment that tipped everything beyond repair, a leaked video. Grainy, raw, undeniable. Camilla, mid-argument, standing toe-to-toe with a senior royal advisor. Her voice was raised, her tone defiant. The words themselves were partially indecipherable, but the fury and desperation were unmistakable. The footage spread across the internet within hours. Analysts dissected every frame. Body language experts and lip readers speculated. Damage control was impossible. With public opinion teetering and palace staff abandoning ship, Charles faced the unthinkable, stripping Camilla of influence. It wasn't a formal abdication, but in effect, it might as well have been. So what do you think about King Charles handing William full authority? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.